Uh, Hello and welcome to AXSChat. We're delighted to have long-term friend and collaborator Richard Streitz with us today. Richard has been working in the field of accessibility and, more importantly, smart cities for a very long time indeed. Won't tell you quite how long, Richard. I'll leave that to you. 21 again, I believe, this year. So welcome, Richard. I know you're part of the community in general and join us for Access Chat every week. It's good to have you on as a guest finally. So can you tell us a little bit about sort of how you came to work in the field and particularly about your interest in smart cities?
Well, thank you, Neil, Antonio, and Debra, for having me. It's a great pleasure and an honor to be here as a guest. I certainly enjoy Access Chat every week, along with the great and amazing community. My interest in how I got started. Well, it's sort of an interesting path in how I came about. I originally came from the film and entertainment industry, actually. So that's sort of a very different direction than most people come into the industry. And it was through a number of a series of development when I was very young in moving through that industry that I ended up working and getting hired by Walt Disney Imagineering, based out of their Burbank offices in Burbank, California. And it was there that I really started getting the exposure to universal design, inclusivity, and accessibility as being important components and integral to the development and design of these great immersive environments that we were creating. And going through that process, starting out as a young designer with the company and then working my way through the organization over time, I had the great privilege to work designing from concept all the way up to grand opening on 4 major theme park resorts around the world, and with that, I had the great privilege of being involved in every single aspect of that, from the conceptual design, sitting in a room with a handful of people, kicking ideas back and forth, trying to decide what we're going to do, what rides and how things are going to be laid out and so forth, working all the way through design and engineering and construction and manufacturing. And all through those processes, one of the things that was just really sort of key is, and that was always a really important touchstone, was inclusivity. And one of the things I thought that was really interesting about that process as I was moving through is that it wasn't a checkbox type item, which is something that later on, after I left the company and started working as a consultant in this industry, is that it wasn't just a checkbox. It was something that was integral into the overall development of what we were doing, because it was important to create these great inclusive environments. And that was just a key component. That was just matter of fact. If we were to include everyone, that meant including everyone, any age group, ability group, and so forth. And so that is where my interest really started getting peaked in being involved. And by the time I left Disney, I did a number of different consulting things and met Debra as I was doing a large development project in Costa Rica, which was going to be one of the first universally designed and accessible resorts and cities. And this is where the whole concept of smart cities really started to blossom as I delved into that. In the design and creation of theme parks and resorts, these are in essence smart cities. They weren't called that at the time, and we just called them integrated developments. But the idea of many data points being connected to a major system was critical to the smooth functioning of these environments that we were creating, these large environments. So the hotels, the resorts, the maintenance facilities, the engineering groups, the operations groups, and security and so forth, safety, all of these, and food preparation and merchandising, all of these subsystems had to constantly be communicating with each other. And as a result, we were in essence creating smart cities way before they were sort of a thing. And for me, what's interesting is seeing that develop from that sort of microcosm, if you will, of the themed entertainment resort industry to something that grows and scales to a large scale, to a large city and state and country, international level, is something that I think is fascinating. It's something that I'm really passionate about pursuing and making sure that as we go through all of these steps, everything is inclusive. So that was a very long-winded answer to your question, and I apologize for that. But that's really sort of how I ended up getting into this industry. And as a result of meeting Debra, pages fall off the calendar, and she ultimately asks if I wanted to join her as her COO, which is where I am now.
Okay, fantastic. And I'm really interested in the work that Disney had done, because it was called out as being, exceptional, winning prizes from the NFB, etc. One difference I would say that there is between the theme parks, which are a great example of a microcosm of a smart city environment, is that they are essentially closed ecosystems, in that the organization owned it and could control it. How do you, or what challenges do you see with sort of scaling up into, say, a citywide ecosystem where it's much harder to sort of control the parameters? You don't own all of the streets, you don't own the Disney princess's castle, you don't have the people in the fancy costumes. Okay, I'm going a bit off piece now, but essentially, what is it that where do you think the challenges lie in delivering this at a larger scale? Because I mean, you did it at a reasonable scale already, but what do you think needs to happen to do this successfully for some of these massive conurbations that we now live in?
Well, that's a great question, and I think the solution to that is something that I think many organizations, city states, et cetera, governments tackle with trying to solve that problem. And simply, I would say that the most common problem is communication between all of these various standardization and communication. As a closed environment, which we were able to have and develop, we were able to control and make sure that as we were designing and creating all these elements, that they all naturally spoke to each other. They all spoke the same language, if you will. We all follow the same communication standards. That differs, of course, when you go into the real world, and now you're talking about a government system or a city where you're dealing with multiple agencies that are dealing and controlling with different ways that they actually have their own internal systems functioning. And being able to communicate with all of those various subsystems. And it really just comes down to everyone buying into a standard of communication. How, is that USB? Is that, whatever it is, it's important that all of these elements have the ability to be able to communicate with each other. And I think that's a very serious problem. One of the things that we see right now is many of the tech companies are going through the process of sort of the VHS beta wars that we saw many years ago. Who's going to be the standard? Who's going to be the one that that's going to win that? Right? And that is, I think, a problem that until that gets ultimately solved, we're going to still have these issues of communication and preventing us from ultimately achieving a true a smart city. Because so let's use the transportation as an example. You have the timed lights and the street switches and so forth that calculate and align how traffic flows and so forth through the course of a heavy traffic thoroughfare. Well, that communication subsystem should also be talking about and transmitting to the other various agencies. It can't right now because some of those systems don't talk to each other. So how can a vendor come in if every time they go into a location they have to customize in essence, and that drives the cost up, which then prolongs how this happens and so forth. So it's I think one of the just fundamental problems that we face in being able to really move forward in any sort of with any sort of large steps or strides is just being able to standardize how these devices communicate with each other.
Richard, I'm particularly interested now, considering the complexity of managing all those aspects and the fact that you have people from different areas having to collaborate together to achieve some level of success that will end up in a good experience for the visitors. What was the process of, let's say, of onboarding new employees to make sure that they were able to be part of those groups and they were able to learn what was the mission? And the other is how were you able to bring everyone together to make sure that all the bits and pieces from the project were actually working and you don't have any sort of conflict situations between, oh, we're not able to do your part because it's not accessible or it's not working.
Yeah, certainly. Training and checks and balances was a very, very important part of the process, and it was just iterative. It was just constant. And much of my time and my colleagues' times as a result of going through this process was really taken up by lots of meetings and the sense of communication between each of us and the divisions and so forth. So how did we manage and do that? And I think this scales up to, I mean, I can talk specifically to how and what we did in the Disney universe, if you will. But I think it scales up, and the process is ultimately really similar, scaled up to a city or state level, et cetera. So training, when a new employee came in, they weren't just put into the position, and you know, there was some on the job training, but really there was a level of training that happened that was a couple weeks, and depending on the position, it could be anywhere from 5 to 10 days of like classroom training, and that was something that everyone had to go through, regardless of your position. That was a core mission training. And something that I think is one of the reasons why Disney stands out so much from everyone else, especially as it relates to its services and its employees. It's the hourly employees, the people that are staff the parks and so forth, that have the public interaction. Those individuals go through a tremendous amount of training so that it is very clear to them their role as an employee, as a face-to-face employee that deals directly with the public, on how they represent the company and what they stand for, what the history of the company is, the legacy that Walt had laid out. And so that message was throughout, and it didn't matter. And I remember in my training course, when I went through it, I had VPs that were coming in. I had a VP from Nike that was being brought in, and he was sitting right beside me. So it was that level of training was just constant for everyone. And I think it's really, really important for any company to in order for their employee to really understand what they're doing, it's important for them to have a really firm understanding of that core basic mission of what the company stands for. And that way everyone is sort of pulling in the same direction. All right, so training, really important. The next thing is certainly just communication. We had an extensive level of interdepartmental and interdivision communication. We had individuals whose sole purpose was to act as coordinators between high-stake milestones, scheduled milestones, to make sure that all the elements that were necessary to create a definitive milestone, major milestone in a schedule, that all those elements were moving together so that they all achieved and came together on that single milestone date. That, I think, is something that was really, really effective. And it's complicated to do, but that's how we did it. And it was through that we hit. It was very, very rare we missed a milestone, and it was very rare that we had any huge major slips in schedule. There were sometimes there were catastrophic events that happened on the site that would delay things that we had no control of, weather related and so forth. But other than that, things ran relatively smooth. And again, it just came down to constant communication.
So Richard,
that answered your question.
Following that up, because a city needs to manage a similar level of complexity to bring citizens together, vendors, and then even within the different cities now, they have internal departments. So, in your opinion, based in your experience, how do you think they should be acting in order to be effective when they are building smart cities and actually starting in an area that is actually relevant, that they suddenly don't just decide to buy technology and call that smart cities without any particular level of engagement with the citizen and the people who actually could benefit from improving their life quality if something goes right.
Well, absolutely. One of the things is having a planned strategy that sits, short term, mid, and long term. You can't just go out and start buying technology and putting it in places and hoping that, well, eventually it turns into a smart city. It really you've got to have a strategic plan laid out. There are low-hanging fruit. There's sort of your 2, 3, under 5 year sort of milestones and goals with accomplishing something. And that could be anywhere, sized either like, you pick something like a park or infrastructure or communication, and try to decide what are the things that we need to do so that as we integrate a level of technology, that it's going to fit in with the longer plan that we have of sort of the mid 10 to 15 year plan, and then you have your 15 to 20, 25 year plan. And how all of the elements, as you sort of lay out that strategy, all layer in, understanding that as you hit your 10 or 12 year mark, that the items that came in on year 1, 2, or 3 already have to have an update that are required to being maintained to keep up to pace with all the elements. It's the lack of, I think, understanding of that and the lack of planning to that causes many cities to get caught into a sort of a vicious cycle of throwing of what they get challenged with throwing good money after bad, and because they constantly have to sort of update. That's just the nature of the beast. All technology must be updated. It's something that we did when we were planning these attractions. We understood that the technology that we were installing was probably going to have to be switched out in 10 or 15 years as those technologies improved and became more efficient. So we built into them modular, the ability of being modular so that they could have that without necessarily causing great upheaval in the attraction. Obviously, in a theme park environment, having an attraction down for any period of time is just devastating. It dramatically affect the effectiveness and the profitability of a particular park or a land in the park, etc. All of those are very critical. So when an attraction goes down, especially a major attraction, that's a serious thing if it's down for a couple hours. So to prevent that, what we did is carefully planned and strategized for high-risk items, the items that we felt had high probabilities of fail over a period of time, and designed the ability for those to be swapped out easily and quickly. And with that comes the ability to be able to update that technology as well and so forth. I think it's the lack of true understanding about the complexities of all of those that really becomes problematic for cities. A, because the people turn over very quick. B, because they have all hidden agendas about their own self-propulsion in their own political careers, and ultimately have no one really monitoring and taking care of and being a steward of the overall strategy. These are things I think that really ultimately hurt and cause the problems for these for becoming smart cities.
I know that we're talking about smart cities, but of course what we're really talking about here are complex projects. So we're certainly talking about it from the lens of smart cities. But I want to sort of build upon Antonio's question. One thing that I see is, once again, it appears often when we're creating these smart cities or these really big complex, projects that it doesn't appear that the communities that are going to benefit or live in these communities are often considered. I know that's not true. Of course, they are being considered. And I remember some people in the disability community, really, there's some, leaders really standing up trying to make sure that smart cities are inclusive to people with disabilities and people that are aging and acquiring disabilities and all of those things. But it feels sometimes like the conversations we're having from the community of people with disabilities and other conversations, smart cities, even IoT, AI, all of that, it seems like we're like talking to the choir rather than talking to the people that are actually building the smart cities and the complex problems. And I remember, Richard, I asked you one time, if when you were working at Disney and you wanted to make sure that the rides and the park and everything at the Disney attraction was fully accessible to all of us, including people with disabilities, would you bring in, contractors, as a consultant, I was wondering this, do you bring in, one individual or a small group of individuals to help you understand how to make sure that you're designing for people with disabilities? And I will never forget your answer, and I want you to answer it for the audience here, but it just feels like often communities that are trying to make sure we're included, and I'm going to just use the community of people with disabilities as an example, we don't really maybe sometimes go about engaging in the conversations in a way that really is how the world is working. I don't know if I'm saying that clearly. I know you know where I'm going with it, Richard, because I've pumped your brain a million times about this. But I just feel like we often are having conversations over here we're siloed conversations as opposed to really being in the thick of it saying, okay, let me tell you how you can truly include people with disabilities. Let's make sure things are accessible from all aspects. We all win. But it just seems like we're having siloed conversations, preaching to the choir, as opposed to really having the conversations with the people that are actually going to build these smart cities. And so I was just wondering, I don't know if you recall that conversation we had about how an organization like Disney would use consultants.
Yeah, consultants was certainly a very interesting a component to Disney, and we leveraged them a lot because we realized that we don't have experts on everything internally. And so as it relates especially to dealing with accessibility, and I'm trying to remember the exact conversation, but I have I recall on a couple.
And I'll just tell you, I'll just say this, that what I was wondering is, does Disney just pick a disability consulting organization and they just use them for every single aspect of the park? So the entire time that you're building the park, you have us on, you have us on contract, and you're using one or two people. And I remember the reply was, there's almost risk to something like this gigantic, just to help you remember.
Yeah, right. And the short answer is we don't use the same people all the time. And the reason for that is exactly that. It's too big to have the opinion of a very few people. It's a very long iterative process that we go through of bringing individuals in and having them look at it so that we have as many eyes with the right optics looking and being involved and engaged in everything. Even from the early design stage, as we start getting into conceptual design and we start modeling things out and talking very specifically about pathways and entranceways and which way the building is facing and so forth, and all of these things play very, very important roles in the overall layout of a themed environment like this. Especially when you consider the amount of people that are going through it in any given year, this is it becomes really important. Throughput and how people move around. So as a result, we would bring these consultants in and have them look at the drawings, have them look at the models, and get their input. And we would do that at various stages at a 30%. We had design reviews and drawing reviews every step of the way that were at the 30, 60, and 90% level of completion. And those were major touch points, but we had intermediary reviews as well, and we would just bring groups in. Many times we would mock these environments up, so we would actually create scaled, full-size scaled environments of a portion that we had a particular concern about, and bring groups of people in, people with disabilities as well as everyone else, kids, elderly, and so forth, and bring them and have them through, and then just ask them questions. And many times we didn't ask them questions because what they did was far more important than what they say. Because human nature being human nature, it was far more critical to sort of capture on video how they interacted with the environment, what they did, and what was the propensity of how they moved and acted and engaged with the environment. These are things that we did iteratively over and over and over and over again with many, many different aspects of the attraction. And so consultants played a huge, huge role in being able to deliver that message in a way that was genuine. Because that's the thing that was more important than anything for us, is to have that genuine opinion. Going back to what you also said about how that scales up to a large city or to a large complex environment, engaging with consultants and getting the opinion of just sort of the everyday people. I think many times what happens, especially in a large governmental environment or situation, is that they go out and they get the large name organizations and so forth. And as a result, I think there's a problem with that. There's an inherent problem that they're going to tell them, those organizations tend to tell them what they want to hear so they get hired again next time and so forth. And I think that there is a little bit of, I don't think they can be as genuine as they could be if they were asking just the real people. Asking real people that have no connection or no specific don't have anything to gain by giving either a good or bad response to that. It's that level of genuine response, I think, that is really, really critical, and I think oftentimes gets missed, especially when you're dealing with large government contracts and so forth.
And you know what? That's a really good point. And I just want to comment. That's why, because the reality is a complex project like this worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The reality is you're probably not going to bring in, one or two people off the street. You'll work somebody. I'll just give AXSChat a shout out because I know AXSChat is very involved in smart cities and things like that. But the good news about using a vendor like AXSChat, who is, I understand is gigantic, but is that they have groups like Neil's that employ people with disabilities and are committed to accessibility and are part of it. So it almost seems like if I were in their shoes, I would almost feel more comfortable using a bigger corporation like an AXSChat on these projects if they're really representing our community and other communities. It almost seems like there's a reduction of risk rather than using other tiny companies. Not to, I think everybody should use Ruh Global Communications, but I'm just trying to be practical here because just the sheer size of these projects. And Neil, I don't know if you want to make a comment.
Yeah, I will.
It seems like there's some risk reduction if you can get the right vendors that are big enough to stand behind what they're doing, but also make sure our community is being heard.
So for sure, large organizations like to transfer risk. It's what pays for the lawyers' houses when they're writing these contracts. That said, even as a large organization ourselves, we would then go out and work with smaller organizations. So essentially, what you're doing is you're shifting the consultation and the community involvement just down the line. You're subcontracting that, if you like, to another organization. Now, I think it's still really important that we don't just get employees doing it, but as Richard said, that you work with a range of experts and then the general public, and as my mother would say, the great unwashed. Because you want that really gritty feedback, and I think I sort of stand with Richard, and whilst as large corporations and as people engaged in the industry, we definitely want the work. We also want stuff to be successful, and we want stuff to work for people, and for that feedback to be unfiltered. Now we may present that feedback in one particular way, and we've got a way of doing that, and we'll talk in terms of standards and everything else, which is really useful for large organizations, but equally they need the basic unfiltered feedback and the stuff that Richard was talking about, the videos of people not telling them what they think they want to hear, because there's real meat in that, in terms of getting genuine useful insights into how organizations could design better products. Do you want to come back on that, Richard?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that unfiltered information was really critical, and to that end, even after the park opens, we still continue that process. We have individuals that stand outside the gates, between that large space between the gates and the trams, or the trams and the parking lot. So this is after they're already out of the environment and they're sort of winding down and they're heading back toward their real world. We ask them one question. There's individuals, usually anywhere from a dozen to 20 individuals that are sort of scattered around outside that large area as people are exiting at the end of the day. And as a family or an individual is approaching them, they ask them one question so that they don't have to stop. They can answer as they keep moving. The idea is not to get a raw answer feedback without having to have them stop and think about it, because that's the value in the question. And that feedback is actually poured over. The data that's collected from that, the exit questions, the exit interviews, are poured over, and real hard decisions are made based purely off that intelligence that's gathered from those individuals, because of its raw nature, because of its unfiltered nature. That feedback is really, really critical, and we do it at every single one of the parks and resorts every single day.
So that's really interesting. And again, you've got the commercial angle. If I may sort of spin that back to my original question, how do we translate that to a large scale for a city? How do we collect exit data on your public transit system? I mean, you could just have people standing outside stations going, how was your journey today? And
that would be interesting.
Well, I mean, we do have people, and they do get some proper, feisty feedback from time to time. Not our people, but essentially, you go on the underground, and they'll have people standing there, and they get a real earful sometimes. But essentially, how do you sort of knit that together? Because the thing about the smartness of smart cities is, as you say, it's the interconnectedness, it's the passing through of data, the feeding of the useful information to improve people's experiences, and with our lens on things, improving people's experiences so that everybody can access the cities and the facilities and everything else, because that's where we see the great potential of all of this data sharing and the technology, is that we can enable people with disabilities to participate to the fullest.
Yeah, I think scaling that is challenging. There's no question. And I think one thing that needs to change is with the way that sort of response happens now. Social media, for example, people will act and talk on social media about their experience. The problem with that is that it's very polarized. The people that ultimately come on and complain or fill up surveys online and so forth are individuals that, for the most part, have gone through either a very negative experience or an extremely positive experience, that either direction they feel compelled, they have to say something. The problem is those are on the extreme ends. What the data that's missing is all that stuff in between, and that's why the reason why at Disney those exit interviews are so critical is because the people don't have a choice. They can choose not to answer and walk by, but in truth, most people do, because it's one question as they're being asked as they're walking up. So as a result, we get a large portion of that sort of middle area, and as a result, that data is extremely valuable. So how does that translate into the real world of a city? Well, very difficult, I would have to say, given the way our systems exist today. I think we need to create a public public relations group or committee in each one of the environments where something like this is being seriously considered, to be able to get that. Now, I mean, they have town halls and so forth, but those are all very singular activities that, again, for the most part, only the loud mouthpieces go to those events. And again, those individuals end up being very extreme in one way or the other. If they're constant, if there's a way that there's a constant feedback, a way of being able to talk to the regular person that has just sort of a regular opinion about things, I think we can get, we will be armed with much more valuable data, and as such, armed with that data, will dictate and help leaders decide which directions to go, what things to focus on, what things, and start prioritizing. And as you prioritize now, you start being able to lay out a large schedule.
Yeah, no, that's it. It's very tricky to knit all of this together, but I think that if we can find a way to collect that data from those that are somewhat more reticent, that would be really useful. We're at the end of our time. It's been fascinating chatting with you. I need to obviously thank our constant friends, Barclays and MyClearText, for all of their support. And we look forward to you joining us and leading a fascinating conversation on Twitter. Thank you very much, Richard.
Thank you all very much. Pleasure to be here. Thank you.